Have you ever stopped to think about how a real person, someone who actually lived and breathed, could eventually become worshipped as a god? It's a huge question, one that sits right at the intersection of history, memory, and faith. And today, that's exactly what we're going to dive into, using two of the most important figures in Indian tradition as our guide. So let's get right to it. If we start with the idea that Rama and Krishna were once historical human beings, how in the world did they end up as gods? When you ask this question, you usually get two very different, very simple answers. On one side, you have the devotional answer, which is pretty straightforward. They were always gods. And on the other side, you've got the more dismissive, skeptical take. They were never real in the first place, just myths from the get-go. But what if both of those answers are, well, a little too neat? The analysis we're digging into today suggests there's a third path, a far more fascinating one that starts not with faith or with fiction, but with actual history. Okay, so to really get this, we have to do a bit of archaeology. We need to peel back centuries of theology and storytelling and look at who these figures were in the earliest versions of their own stories. So let's take a look at the human Rama. In the oldest layers of the Ramayana, he is not some flawless, all-powerful being. Far from it. He is an incredible king, for sure, but he is deeply human. He gets wounded and he bleeds. He feels doubt and overwhelming grief. He's forced into making brutal political choices, and he is absolutely bound by fate and real-world limitations. And it's pretty much the same story for the original Krishna of the Mahabharata. He is a master politician, a brilliant strategist. He's there negotiating treaties, coming up with these complex political plans. But here's the thing, he's not all-powerful. He actually fails to stop the catastrophic war that the whole epic is about. He even makes mistakes. And this, right here, is the key takeaway. For these original epic stories to work, for them to be these powerful, timeless tales, you don't need divinity. They're incredible stories about extraordinary humans facing impossible odds. So that's our baseline. We're starting with remarkable people, not preordained gods. So if they started as human heroes, what changed? How did they make that leap? Well, the research suggests it wasn't a single event. It was a slow, gradual transformation, one that was born out of centuries of social chaos and political turmoil. You have to picture this. After the historical period the epics are set in, around 800 BCE, northern India just descends into this long, dark period of political fragmentation and constant warfare. And as the generations passed, the real, nitty-gritty historical context of those epic wars, it started to fade. Society was left trying to make sense of these huge foundational traumas, and blaming it all on simple human mistakes just didn't seem like a good enough explanation anymore. And you can almost see this happening in three steps, like a chain reaction. First, the historical context, the specific politics, the geography, it all gets fuzzy. Then, when a culture looks back at a massive catastrophe, blaming it on a few bad decisions just feels unsatisfying. It doesn't match the scale of the tragedy. And that's where step 3 kicks in, divine causality. The idea that gods were involved fills that gap, and it offers a much bigger, more meaningful story. So you've got this society that's looking for a deeper meaning, for a better explanation. How was that need met? Well, it happened through a truly brilliant theological innovation that gave these human heroes what you could call a divine upgrade. The key, the main tool for this upgrade, was the concept of the avatar. This idea created the perfect theological framework. It allowed a major god, in this case Vishnu, to enter human history by taking on a human form. All of a sudden, a historical king could now be seen as a direct manifestation and appearance of a timeless cosmic god on Earth. And you can see just how big of an upgrade this was. The hero goes from being a historical figure, a great moral example for his time, to being an avatar, an embodiment of cosmic order, a timeless moral anchor, and eventually a savior god for all time. The scope of who they are and what they do just explodes. Now this, to me, is the most fascinating part. This whole process didn't just invent new personalities from scratch. No, instead, it took the core human traits that history already gave them and just turned the volume way, way up. So Rama's well-known commitment to law and order gets magnified into the divine ideal of a perfect king. And Krishna's complicated, sometimes morally ambiguous strategies, they get reinterpreted as a symbol of divine wisdom, something that's beyond our simple human ideas of right and wrong. And all this leads to a really powerful conclusion. History wasn't being thrown away or forgotten. It was being translated. Later texts like the Puranas, they weren't trying to fake history. They were trying to preserve its moral heart by translating it into a language that would last forever, the language of myth. Now, you might be thinking, wow, what a unique story. But here's the twist. This process of elevating historical figures into gods, it's not unique to India at all. In fact, it seems to be a deeply human pattern, something we see happening in cultures all over the ancient world. I mean, just look around. From Gilgamesh in Mesopotamia, who was almost certainly a real king, to Heracles in Greece, to Romulus, the founder of Rome, you see the same thing again and again. These foundational figures, people who made a massive impact on their societies, are slowly, over centuries, elevated into cultural heroes, or even semi-divine beings. So what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, it really asks us to flip our whole understanding of the relationship between myth and history right on its head. Because here's the thing, maybe, just maybe, the deification of a historical person isn't a sign that the historical memory is weak. Maybe it's a sign that the memory is incredibly strong. Think about it. Societies don't spend thousands of years worshiping and telling stories about purely fictional characters they just made up. They deify the figures whose impact was so real, so profound, that their memory had to be preserved in the most powerful and permanent way imaginable. And so we come back to that third path. The evidence suggests that Rama and Krishna were very likely historical figures who became gods. It wasn't an overnight switch. It was a slow, long transformation, driven by real-world social stress and achieved using specific theological tools. It was a way to make sure that a historical memory, one that was just too important to let go of, would never, ever be forgotten. You know, looking at it this way doesn't diminish these traditions. If anything, it makes them even richer. It helps us see the real human beings behind the myth. And it helps us appreciate myth, not as a fairy tale, but as a powerful vessel for carrying history. And it leaves us with one final, profound question to think about. What other stories that we dismiss as just myths might actually be the strongest, loudest echoes of our own forgotten history?